That was a very abrupt cut. Hello, world of e-regulations and OMB friends. We're here back with more demoing work to do from the 18F group. I am Will Sullivan. CM and Jen are here to show you some of the amazing work that we're doing on the OMB e-regulations project, just completing sprint Capellini. And our sprint demo is ending today. This is a 2-week period in which we are doing prototyping, doing research, and we're going to talk about some of that work right now. So to get rocking and rolling, this is our sprint demo. CM's going to talk about the authoring tool and infrastructure setup, and Jen is going to talk about prototypes. And I will turn it over to CM.
You're muted, Sam.
Can I unmute him?
Good point. Good point.
Okay.
Thank you, Jen. So the majority of the demo today that Jen's going to be talking about are sketches and wireframes for public-facing / agency-facing stuff. But one of the bits that we worked on this sprint was for, it was a prototype for a different user group. Teresa worked on a prototype for the admins at OMB, the editors of policy. And this is because, if you recall, we have these policy documents that we've been going through and pulling out specific requirements from them and turning them into a CSV, which presumably is there's a PDF on one side of your screen, a CSV on the other. You're copy pasting things over, which is really painful and error prone. So let me show you some of the work that Teresa's been doing. All right, so you can see in this text area here that this is an OMB policy. It's policy number 60, and it's just been copy pasted. I think I bolded the headers. But we can imagine this is a new policy, and we're trying to figure out what the requirements are within the policy. So we've pasted the contents, and we're reading through. And again, the role that I'm playing right now is that of an editor of policy over at OMB. I'm reading through and I realize that this component right here, this paragraph, this is a requirement. This is a specific ask that we have of agencies. And so in this prototype, I can click the R for requirement and specifically delineate this chunk. Now this is helpful because it means that we're able to kind of be within the flow of the editor while they are pulling out specific pieces of information. So you can imagine that this is a first step, that as a second step, like there'd be a separate screen where they're adding more meta information about dates and things like that. But we can try to pull out some of that and say, for example, that shall is the priority for this requirement. So I can click the priority button and kind of add this markup. And again, this would be some of the metadata, but it means that we can tie specific requirements to specific chunks of text within the policy. And hopefully this is a nicer interface for maintaining this. So again, this is a prototype. It's not necessarily something that we want to do for sure, but it's a direction that we could possibly move in. So that was the authoring tool that Teresa worked on. I also wanted to talk about our environments. So we are hosted right now in cloud.gov. We have two environments. One is the demo environment, where as soon as we change code, the demo environment gets updated. So it's consistently in sync with our latest code. It is currently loaded with the phase 1 requirements data. So there's a CSV that was released in November, and all of that is loaded into that environment. There are no admin users there. So all the data is there, but you can't log in. Our production environment is very similar. Two changes. One is that it is a manual deploy process, so we actually want to be able to press the button that deploys all of the code. And the second is that it has a few more server instances, so it can have a heavier load. We would like this upcoming sprint to import the remaining data. So phases 2 and 3 were combined into 1, 2, and 3 were combined into one big CSV with slightly different formatting. And that was released in February. We'd like to import all of that data. Point out to OMB where there are data errors and skip those rows if we don't know how to fix them. We would also like to create for OMB admin users so that for both prod and demo, so that they can maintain the production database. We would like our production system to be the system of record as opposed to passing around CSVs. And I believe I showed last time there was a Django interface that has fields for each of the columns that are in the CSV right now. One note there is that as we change the interface, as we add, for example, taking the subjects, the entities that have to perform the requirements, as we turn that into tags and other sorts of nicer schemas, we will be responsible for maintaining all of the data that's already in the database. I also wanted to mention that we've been working in terms of infrastructure on how to replicate the production environment, which you can see here has a version of Linux with GNU, Python, Node, and Postgres, all at specific versions. We want to be able to replicate that locally, but if you look at the typical OS X developer, they've got, this is BSD, OS X, Postgres.app, and Homebrew, which don't quite match the environment for cloud.gov. The people who will need to maintain this ultimately will be running Windows, which is its own separate beast. So we want to be able to recreate the production environment locally. And the way that we're going to do that, and the way that we have done that, is to use a system called Docker. So OMB can do this right now. Our developers are using this right now. The idea is that you install one application, whether you're on Windows or Linux or OS X, you install Docker, clone our repository, and run this one command, and you'll have a working instance. So that's what we've been working on. I showed the prototype for an authoring tool, explained our cloud environment, and described how to get started locally. I'm going to pass back to Jen now.
Hey, everyone. I'm going to share my screen with you all. Sorry about the inception there, but hopefully you all can see this presentation. So I'm going to talk about the work John and I have been doing to further our research around this project and the early design wireframes that we've been working on. And that's really going to be the meat of what I'm going to talk about today. In terms of research, we have been doing more research over the past 2 weeks. We specifically focused on talking to policy writers, which is something that we didn't get the chance to talk to before. And we may even have another scheduled next week coming up. So this is going to be an ongoing process where we continue to talk to people. And also once we have a prototype up and running, we definitely want to put that prototype in front of people to get their feedback as early and as often as possible. And so in order to keep up with us and doing this research, we created this wiki page, which is part of the GitHub repo where all the code is. And this is the place where we can easily update. I put the research plan in there as kind of like the beginning of this work. And the findings we discussed last week, John and I worked on I'm using air quotes that you can't see, but a one-pager of those findings, which is on, you can see the link in this view, or you can go directly to this link here. But it just has some quotes that we learned, and the overarching groupings and thought processes that we heard are the problem areas from our research over the past month or so. So feel free to go check that out, give us some feedback. But this is all, I'm not going to dig too deep into this because it's mostly what we heard last week, or last demo. So moving into the exciting part are the wireframes. So based on that research, we all sat down and tried to figure out what is it that we can learn from this research, what problems are we trying to solve, and how can we get there. And so the way John and I started off was to go off in our own directions, kind of, you know, go as blue sky as you can, figure out what you need to do. And we had a bunch of different iterations where we were trying to figure out exactly which direction we should go. So combining all of that work this sprint is the wireframes that I'm going to show you here today. And in case nobody knows what a wireframe is, it's basically the step above sketching. So it's going to be, you know, a computerized document that shows some form of layout and some form of interaction, but it's not nearly as pretty and functional as a full-on design mock-up is going to be. A wireframe is, you know, it's going to be a relatively quick and dirty way of really trying to present and getting ideas on the table and making sure that the direction we want to go actually might work before we dig deeper into it. So with that said, the first direction that both John and I were finding were in both of our wireframes, so kind of combining those and putting them together, was the concept of filtering and sorting. So here's the first wireframe. What you have here is, you know, the concept. We're generally on this OMB policy site. And the main content, I guess I can point, which is great. The main content are these blocks of quote unquote requirements. So there's, you know, a little bit of metadata about what policy it belongs to, what verb is the importance it's using here, the agencies it applies to, the sunset date, deadline, and the ability to kind of read in and see a little bit more. So the main thing here is you see up here the ability to organize this list that you have here and sort either by just this list of requirements, or if you click on policy, I'll show you in a minute, the ability to kind of group these by policy. But the interesting thing that's going on here is the ability to browse and filter by whatever we can. The first major thing is the topic. So any tags that people use, you can add as many as you want here. Those are the topic areas that would sort down or filter out the list that's over here on the right. We also have the concept of filtering down by agency or specific group. So it could be specifically CFO Act agencies. It could be a specific agency. We talked a bit about groups that are inside different policies, like chief information officers or the COI group that is specifically mentioned within the memoranda itself. So there are different types of groups that would also need to be created here, but would help you narrow down to what you're looking for. And then also thinking a bit about, you know, what do I need to do now? So having reporting cycles potentially being a filter, also maybe deadlines and sunset dates, things like that. So this is sort of the direction that we were thinking has some serious potential here for organizing and narrowing down which requirements apply to you. Oops. And if you were to click this little read more button on any of these things, the theory on this version of the wireframe is that your little requirement thing would expand open. You could see the rest of the metadata. You could see the tags that are the reason why this policy is so high up in the list for you, how relevant it is to you based on your filters. And I don't have this on the page, but I would assume, you know, at least at first, a link to the policy PDF itself. And then this is a view of the, as I said before, the requirements here. So these 3 requirements, I'm in the policy tab, are grouped by this overarching policy. I think there's a couple of things going on here. You could either click and go and read the entire policy on this whole group of requirements, or maybe there's a way to also do the expanding feature I mentioned a minute ago and kind of expand each of these requirements in here until you get a little bit deeper into exactly what you're looking for. And all the policies are listed in here. So that's the first thought process, which is focusing around the concept of filtering and sorting through and really just digging deeper, narrowing down exactly what it is that applies to you and what requirements you're looking for. And so Another side of it that we wanted to really focus on is the concept of the policy document itself. Especially users right now are very focused on, I have to read the entire document. That's very important to me. Requirements are useful, but the whole document has information in it. So this is basically the same wireframe we saw before. We're in the requirement tab here, but the difference is instead of that expanding feature where it said read more, this says read the policy and kind of points you over to where you're going to go next. So say I clicked on one of these requirements. I'm then taken into the policy itself. So there are a few things going on here. I was taken into the policy. There's a little bit of metadata up here, and I think that there's room for more metadata if we need it. And I was taken directly to the requirement that I had clicked on. And the requirement is somewhat highlighted so that I know exactly what I'm looking at. But I'm within the context of the policy. So this policy section is open. This is the language around this specific requirement paragraph. But as you can see, if I scrolled up, there's a background section here that I could easily open up and dig deeper into and read that. Or I see that there's another requirement down here, but I could open up the section that it's a part of and read more about it there and scroll around. So that's kind of the concept of what's going on here. I'm taken to the requirement in context, but I'm still able to skim and read more quickly than having everything all on the page at the same time. This is using the same information as what's going on here that I just talked about, but instead of having the policy, metadata navigation at the top of the screen, using this left-hand sidebar to allow you to filter through and navigate around the document. This very closely matches the way the eRegs platform works now for regulations. The one issue with this is that policies do very much differ in their length and in their number of sections and subsections. So this is one concept that I think could be very useful, but we will have to test it out to see how well it works. But the new concept here is that we could pull out which sections have requirements, so you could much more easily skip down, especially in the longer policies, to see the information that you need along with scrolling around over here. And finally, this is sort of a mix between the two, but I had this expand button on each of these requirements. So the theory is here, I could click and dig even deeper to see some of the metadata. I don't know if that would need to be expand collapse interaction or if there's some other way of showing this, but the concept is having that metadata very close at hand. Maybe it's not served up right away. Maybe it's hidden until the user needs to see it. So that's sort of the concept, going from requirement down to the policy level and allowing you to dig around in the policy level as much as you can and always be able to come back up to your filtering and looking for other things that you need to look for. Our goal for the next sprint is to, I guess I'll stay here. Our goal for the next sprint is to sort of take the ideas in these wireframes and start trying to use the data we have to see how the filtering down, experiment with as many filters and sorts as we can to make sure that the list that comes out of it is, we make sure it's as usable as possible. So yeah, that's where we are from a design perspective, and I'd love your feedback I will turn it back to Will first.
Great. Thank you. And now I will share my screen. So our next demo will be March 3rd. One thing I forgot at the beginning is, since this is being recorded on YouTube, you can refer back to this video. It'll be at the same link. You can share it with your friends, family, spend your President's Day weekend watching it on a loop. It will also be added to the playlist we have for the previous 3 demos, or 2 demos. This is our 3rd in the project. And that playlist will continue to be updated with all of our demos. So you can go back and reference things if you want to show people examples of what you've just been shown. If you want to go and review some of the technical information that CM talked about, it'll all be on the internet, and you can feel free to reference it in the future. So with that, we are going to stop the recording in a second here, and we're going to jump to teleconference line where we will basically chat about what everyone just saw, take questions, talk about our plans for the weekend, all the good stuff, and that good Friday afternoon activities. So you can close this window and dial into the phone number that is on the screen and join us, and we'll chat there. And that will conclude this recording. You all have a happy, safe weekend if we don't hear you on the conference line, and stay regulated. Or, yeah.